For a wider discussion on support for victims of torture, the Executive Director, Sterling Center for Law and Development, Deji Ajari, joins me from Abuja. Thank you for joining us on The World Now. Well, torture is a crime against humanity, but then everywhere around us, we see it being perpetrated. Talk to us about the significance of this day in tackling this challenge.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ajari.
Yes, sorry, please. I didn't get your question.
All right, so I was talking about the significance of today because, yes, the United Nations has mentioned that torture is a crime against humanity. But you and I know that almost on a daily basis, we hear cases of torture. So talk to us about the significance of a day set aside by the United Nations to tackle this challenge.
Yes, thank you. The day, June 26th of every year, International Day in support of victims of torture, is a day set aside by the United Nations. And of course, that has also been embraced by many across the world as a day to um, call attention to the evil of torture across the world. Now, it is also a day to show solidarity and support for all persons who have been victims of torture and to remind governments to hold accountable persons who have perpetrated torture in one form or the other, and of course, to call attention to the need to rehabilitate such victims of torture. Now, the significance for us here in Nigeria is even more heightened given the fact that torture continues to occur on a daily basis in these different spheres of law enforcement. And it is important for us to understand, for the purpose of the United Nations Convention Against Torture, that torture is necessarily committed by persons in authority, law enforcement agents, and or other state actors, and not by private persons. Now, generally speaking, our law enforcement agents, and none of them is excluded, have come to see torture as a form of interrogation technique, as a form of technique to secure or acquire confessions from suspects. They've also seen torture as a means of punishing persons that they suspect to have committed offense. And this is contrary to all of the provisions contained in the convention, UN Convention Against Torture, which is also in the Anti-Torture Act 2017, which has been enacted by Nigeria, as well as the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
All right.
This instrument specifically prohibits the use of torture under any circumstances, including situations of war or other forms of crisis. And so the ticking bomb example that some people have used to justify torture can never be a basis for justification of torture at all.
All right, so let's talk about the victims of torture. They sure need a lot of support, but then talk to us about those practical ways that we can offer support to them.
Yes. Now, the UN Convention Against Torture extensively makes provisions for methods of, means by which support can be given to victims of torture. Unfortunately, the Nigerian Anti-Torture Act does not contain such provisions. However, Nigeria is a signatory to the United Nations Convention Against Torture and the optional protocol to it, and so it's obligated. Now, victims of torture first are entitled to protection from those who perpetrate the the torture themselves. Now, they are entitled to rehabilitation, and they are entitled to compensation for such violations, for such torture that has been meted out on them. Now, in Nigeria, there is no specific mechanism that has been set up for this. And unfortunately, you know what that means. What it means is that everybody pushes that responsibility to the other. So nobody takes responsibility for that. As at today, apart from the activities of some civil society organizations in offering some sort of support to victims of torture, we do not have any institutionalized methods of giving such support to victims of torture.
We know that the Federal Ministry of Justice is calling on law enforcement agents to, as a matter of fact, stop the act of torture in their detention centers. But that is talk. Implementation is key. So what effort do you see being taken, or what do you think should be done to include these support measures in the Anti-Torture Act of Nigeria such that we are able to cater to the need of persons who have gone through torture?
Thank you. I would love to see the day that the federal government of Nigeria is going to set up mechanism or amend the Anti-Torture Act to include measures for the protection or support for victims of torture. However, I must tell you that that optimism is not at its optimum, and the reason is simply because in 2017, when the Anti-Torture Act itself was passed into law, quite a lot of us rejoiced, were quite happy, and that the act would come into force and protect, prevent, or punish people who perpetrate torture. But I will tell you that that joy, that's happiness that we had then has not been justified in any way. And I will tell you the truth, because between 2017 and now, since the act came into force, not a single person has been prosecuted, talk more of being convicted of acts of torture. And this is with clear evidence of existence of torture on a daily basis in our policing system. And so when one expresses worry that it is not just about her passing the law or having the policy or having some sort of documents that specifies this, it is because of this experience. One would wonder that if the law is passed and it is not fully and systematically and strategically implemented, then of what value is that law? That law specifically says anybody who tortures a citizen or anybody who supervises the torture of a citizen, basically anybody or any superior officer who looks away while his junior officers inflict torture, or anyone who is in charge of, say, a unit of a law enforcement agency where torture has occurred, will be liable for such acts of torture. But truthfully, nobody, not a single person, not one, has been charged under this act. And yet torture continues to occur on a daily basis. So beyond the rhetorics, beyond the legislation, beyond the documents, there is need for action. And that action must come from not just one particular person or sector, but from all stakeholders. So you have spoken, for instance, about the Ministry of Justice, which has, taken some very good steps in setting up the National Committee Against Torture, which of course does not fit rightly into the definition of the National Preventive Mechanism. But then we are also aware that there are efforts currently ongoing to domicile the National Preventive Mechanism in the National Human Rights Commission. Very good efforts. But it is also important that the prosecuting unit of the Ministry of Justice must start looking into cases of torture. There are so many of them that make the news.
Action is critical at this time, Mr. Ajari. Action is critical.
Action.
I must sincerely appreciate you. I can sense your passion for this matter, from the way you have spoken about it. Thank you for sharing with us. Executive Director, Sterling Center for Law and Development, DG Ajari. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me.